Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about a stolen prophecy, a cunning bounty hunter, and we're going to be talking a lot about monsters, how to keep them from getting stale, here on Rise of the GM. All right, well, here we are.
All right.
Again, what is today? Today is the 14th of December.
Oh,
we're getting close to Christmas. It's crazy to think about it being the middle of December already.
Yes.
But I'm excited. We have at least Adam and I, the jobs we have, we are now, as of today, entering kind of a break where we get about 3 weeks off. All of you who are out there working stiffs, who are also GMing, sorry about you. But we're going to take 3 weeks. We're actually going to be here next week because we love this so much that even during our break, we come back for you GMs. But I will go ahead and give you a little teaser that the following week, the 28th, we will not be having a podcast because we're going to be with families celebrating Christmassy things in various states and places. So we'll tell you about that again next week when we get close. But we're glad to be in December, and it feels like a gift just to get a little break from work and to get to talk about game mastering with you guys. So
this is episode 19, Matthew. 19. That's crazy to me.
Moving.
Awesome.
We're moving, guys. And there's no end in sight.
Nope.
We've got stuff planned out the wazoo for the next 7 years. Actually, I don't think we have 7 years, but we have a lot of good stuff in the pipeline ready to come at you guys. But we're going to start today, as we always do, with our encounter starter, a little thing that hopefully can get your brain pumping for some ideas of encounters. And then we will go on to our main topic of the day. I have the encounter starter today from Eureka, the Gnome Stew book. This one is called The Importance of Proper Wording. All right, and this one's about a stolen prophecy. So listen to this. PCs, hear a proclamation that all valiant souls should aid the church in recovery of a stolen object. I like how they put that propaganda on there. It's like, if you're valiant, you know you need to come and help the church. Yeah. When they inquire about the details of this holy quest, they're led to a priest, the one who issued the proclamation, and he begs them to be discreet about the true nature of the quest and explains that a scroll of prophecy has been stolen. Okay, you never want prophecy just out in the world because prophecy is crazy, right? This one explains that it foretells of a great doom that would be caused by a yellow-haired child. The church wants this prophecy returned, but the wording is so vague that the church officials fear what might happen if it becomes popular knowledge. They foresee riots and people murdering yellow-haired children left and right, blood running in the streets, right? So they want you to keep it quiet. The priest can share 2 pieces of information to help the PCs start their hunt. The first one is this: 4 men were seen near the temple before the theft. So that's the first thing you know. And the second thing you know is only a handful of fences in the city would be able to move a stolen holy relic. Those things are pretty hard to kind of move under the radar, and there's only a few that could do it. The priest asked the PCs not to reveal anything about the prophecy during their search because, again, they're worried what could happen. 3 of the 4 thieves have been spending their time in a local bar arguing about what to do with the prophecy. Okay, they're not sure. They speak in code, so it won't be just like, you hear people talking about the prophecy. So as a GM, you'd have to come up with what's this code going to be that they're talking in. So the PCs might encounter them and feel like something suspicious when they hear this, but they might not put things together. One of the thieves does have a yellow-haired child, son, and he wants to destroy the prophecy. 2 of the thieves want to ransom it back to the church for money. I don't know how that would go. While a 4th thief, the leader, is pondering the problem on his own, but keeps tabs on the other 3. Visiting a fence who deals in relics. So you're given, there's only about 4 guys who could do this. When they visit one of those fences who deal in relics, the PCs learn that a shipment was expected, but hasn't been received. And if they play their cards right, the fence might offer to hire them to retrieve the relic for him. The fence can also tell them about a little bit more about the thieves, as can other local crooks and ne'er-do-wells. If the PCs end up confronting the thieves will flee. If they're cornered, a few will fight, but the thief with the yellow-haired son will surrender. He'll reveal that he wants the prophecy destroyed to protect his son. But before he'll be able to disclose the location of the prophecy, the leader will kill him with a crossbow shot and escape into the area's maze of alleyways there. A map to the thieves' hideout will be able to be found on one of the thieves, leading to the PCs to the hideout and to the leader. When the PCs show up, he'll be scooping up the band's loot, getting ready to leave town. The leader, if they confront him, can be intimidated or bribed into giving them the prophecy. He'll fight if he's pressed, but he prefers to avoid combat. The PCs should be aware that he still has knowledge of the prophecy and could retell it, and that he's not to be trusted, making him a potential liability. And that last line makes this one all worth it for me. Okay, right. First of all, I always love prophecy. Mm-hmm. I love prophecy in all my games. My games almost always deal in prophecy. Because prophecy is one of those things that you can read 20 different ways and you have no idea what it really means until you look back on it happening. It's just like real prophecy, right? You know, you look in the Bible and you say, how could they miss this? But, you know, if you were there before everything happened, how would you know? You know, but you're looking back, you're like, oh, of course. That's the way prophecy is. And so this prophecy of the yellow-haired child, you know, causing doom of some sort, you know, I love working that in. But then you get to the end. Let's say you get all the way to where this thing describes, and you've got the prophecy back in your hand. But now you, as a party, who are good people, right? You're not monsters. You're not evil villains. You got this guy who most likely is not trustworthy and would tell, who knows exactly what the prophecy says, could cause craziness in the streets, and you have to decide what to do. So do you kill him? Do you imprison him unjustly because you don't want him to tell? Do you turn him over to the church, who most likely, you know, I don't know. I guess I can't say the church would kill him because the church might not, but they would probably do something to keep him silent as well. What do you do with this guy? So there's this conundrum. I also love the idea of really playing it up, that part in there where they say if the guy surrenders, he's about to tell him, and then, you know, a crossbow bolt kills him. Well, now the dad's dead, and I would say you guys have this little yellow-haired boy now who is in your charge, who was with him, and it's like, oh no, what do we do now? And you got this. I would even make it more specific if it were me. I would say, you know, when you read, because of course you're going to read the prophecy, right? You're not just going to give it back without reading it. When you read it, it says, you know, the yellow-haired boy who will cry tears of blood, but cause doom of the kingdom. And you look at this boy and he has this like red mole right under his eye that's kind of tear shaped. And you're like, oh my goodness, is that really it? Or is it not it? And so you guys now have this, and I would leave them guessing, you know, is this going to be true? Is he going to bring about something? And then you could work that into your campaign. You could play that in somehow, or you could make it just be a big red herring. And then later another yellow-haired child with a, you know, something even stronger, you know, and you've just been taking care of this kid. There could be all kinds of fun you could have with this. So this is a fun one for me. I love these things where there's prophecy involved. And I think the longer for me that I can extend uncertainty in my players. Is this really the child? Is this really something that we have to like take care of? And introducing moral ambiguity. What do we do with this guy who might tell and start like a killing of yellow-haired children if we just leave him, or you know, we got what we need? Do we just take this back? You know, and having to decide that. Those two things make this an interesting encounter for me. One that I would easily drop into some city scene where I have my players and this call goes out. You know, it's easy to drop that into any campaign. And then I would begin to work this prophecy into my overall campaign idea and story. And boy, the places I could take it. What about you, Adam? I just went crazy on this.
No, it's great. Yeah. And you actually kind of blew my mind because I read it, but I didn't piece together the fact that was the father that gets killed by the guy. Like, and I'm like, oh, that changes some things for sure. Because then you have, I mean, the fact that kid has just been made fatherless, you know, kind of thing. But I like this a lot. I love the tag at the end that this like leads somewhere else. And, you know, I think like trying to think through, you know, he's as GM, what was the leader, you know, he's off to his side pondering like what is it exactly he's pondering, and kind of get like a motivation set for that of like, okay, was he pondering like, oh, I need to do something about this yellow-haired children that like are going to cause this, or was it just pondering who do we sell it to, where is that going? Because that could definitely become a more complex thing going forward. I really
Maybe.
like.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just
go ahead.
maybe he used to be part of the church and he knew of this prophecy and felt like it needed to be out there. And so when
Right.
his father was like, "Hey, I want to destroy the prophecy," that's why he killed him, you know, when he
Yeah.
was about
Yeah.
to tell you where it
Right.
was, because he knows that the church is trying to cover up something that absolutely needs to happen.
Right.
Maybe because the emperor who would be thrown down in this, cause the doom of the empire or kingdom or whatever, is a bad person. And it
Right.
needs to be overthrown.
Yeah.
There needs to be
Yeah.
doom because,
Right.
and you know, so that could be, maybe he's a good guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
a good guy
Yeah.
who killed somebody, but
Right. he has intentions that are maybe noble. Yeah. I love this is it's a good, um, like social and like your more investigative characters can get some work and some play here, you know, in that's really cool for this. I do like, and I think like some of these for me, it's like really easy to grab and be like, okay, I need something for Thursday night in a couple weeks. Oh, this would be really good to like tag into here. But this is one that I really would want to either set up or come back to as time went on in the game, and not just let it be a single kind of thing. Like them running across, you know, if I knew this was coming maybe earlier in the game, they come across a yellow-haired boy, and why does the GM keep pointing out that he's a yellow-haired boy? He's a blonde kid, you know, like why does that keep coming up? Or just like trying to get that to stick in their minds. And then, you know, 12 weeks later, 12 sessions later, this comes up and it's like, okay, was that kid, you know, there's some uncertainty with that too, like you talked about, of was that kid something or was it just random? And you know, as a GM, I don't even know if I would know at that point, but it's like it's that foreshadowing of things. Or on the flip side of that, we do this and then they, you know, it's like you buy a car and then all you can see is the car you bought.
yeah,
You run across this thing and then all you can see is yellow-haired boys like the
everywhere.
whole time, you know, it's like you keep running across all these people and it's like this constant, you know, okay, is this the kid, you know, and what do we do if it is or if it isn't? So I think that's really could be interesting. And even the idea of like self-fulfilling prophecies, it's like, okay, what was this and is it going to actually happen now because this prophecy is possibly out in the world, versus just, you know, that kind of thing. I think could be fun to play with the PCs, because honestly they're not innocent either of like, not innocent's not the right word, but they know the prophecy also, so there may be people coming after them now that
From
they
the
know. You know,
church.
we talk about the guy who
Ooh.
got away who knew it, but like
Yeah.
assuming they read it, you know, or at least they know the idea, that kind of, they're not immune to being chased down for having knowledge that no one else is supposed to know either, you know, kind of thing. So I think that could be interesting to bring a lot back into that because of just like one little encounter.
And you could play with the idea of what they do with this yellow-haired child.
Mm-hmm.
If they decide to keep him and take care of him, then we've got all the stuff we've talked about.
Right.
If they decide, yeah, no, we can't really, we're just going to put him here, there's something to come back to later in the story. Maybe anger springs up in him for what happened to his father and what they did, and then because of that, he causes the downfall of the kingdom. Who knows?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Anyway, good encounter. Good
That's
encounter.
Cool.
About prophecy. So there's something you might be able to use. Give it a shot. Do some thinking on it. Write some what ifs, and let us know if you do anything cool with that one. That's a good one. Today, our main topic, we're going to be talking about monsters. We're going to be talking about how to keep monsters fresh, how to keep monsters from getting stale. What do you do in all of the monstery stuff that you do as a GM? So, Adam, as always, I'm going to kind of hand this one to you to run, and I'm going to throw in stuff
Cool
here and there and everywhere.
Yeah, this is one of these that I would love. Like, I know we got some people in the chat right now. I'd love to hear some ideas that maybe you have, or if like you're watching this later, drop it in comments. If you're on our socials, I'd love to have. I'm probably gonna have some polls and stuff about that too, of just like, what do you do? You know, like what do you all do at your tables, kind of thing. But this idea of like freshening monsters, Barry Hudek last week, he kind of started to mention into this of like he's been playing, you know, for a very, very long time and been around like D&D and things like that. And how there's a staleness that sometimes comes with these kind of combats and things. And I don't know, you know, I feel like I'm pretty good at like, or pretty happy to, what is it? Suspend reality is not the right word, but it's kind of in that realm of just like, this is part of the game. Like we're in this, I'm gonna enjoy that. But I do think there's been times where it's like, okay, it's another orc, you know, or it's another dragon, you know, that kind of thing. And after you've played for some time, so this idea was like, how can we? There are ways I think to freshen up things to make them feel more new, specifically for veteran players. But the thing I kind of wanted to toss in first to the conversation was with this question. This question actually may not be necessary for you. You know, like if you're out there listening to this, you're like brand new, all your table is brand new people. It may not matter. You know, like I remember playing early on and being like, whoa, you know, like every time anything happened, it's like, here's a kobold. Whoa, awesome. You know, like it's crazy. And still that can happen now. But you know, like kind of know, I think know yourself, know your table. If you're an ascending GM, you know, wanting to get going here, some of this may not be as like important right now, but later on it could be for that. So knowing your table and knowing like, is it necessary to like try to start changing things, or is it good where it's at right now? I think another thing to like think through before we even start talking about this is like that 8 types of fun idea for your players, because I think some of the people, if they're coming in and like specific funds, this may not be as big of a deal, or it may be a really big deal to like freshen things up. So just like knowing your players, again, just kind of wanted to come back to that briefly of, okay, what does he really get fun? What does she really get fun out of? And like, how does that look when it comes to monsters? Do I need to make them more role playing oriented if like this person really finds a lot of fun with that kind of immersion into the game? Then maybe these monsters need to be more like interesting in that realm of like role play and connection and like conversation with a creature. Or if this person's a really combat oriented, then I'm going to be thinking a little differently about like, what does a freshening up of a monster look like? So that's kind of like some pre talk there that I wanted to just toss out. But the thing I was thinking through this week of like talking about like freshening up monsters is I feel like that comes into 2 facets here. And Matthew, I want to kick over to you after I say these and see like what your thoughts are on that. Maybe there's some things to add, but the first facet is like, what is the feel or like even like the idea of the monster? Like, I think that can be a thing that we focus in on freshening up of like what do I actually like see and smell and hear, you know, like my character, like how are we engaging with that? And like the whole idea of the thing. The other is like, how do they combat? You know, I think that's another question of like freshening them of, okay, we keep using the orcs, but it's like, okay, the orcs run in with broadswords and stand there foot to foot and attack until they die. Like we want to do something more than that with freshening them up. So like those 2 things kind of came to mind for me. Do you feel like there's other like facets of how to look at them?
Yeah, I'm gonna take one step back, and like you,
Okay.
the kind of pre-talk
Mm-hmm.
is the idea that sometimes as GMs we're too fresh. I'll just say that from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
we have a monster manual, or we have like a codex, or we have like every monster at our disposal. And we go through and we pick a different one for every single battle, and we have different 7 different ones every week. It's constantly changing, and people like have a hard time finding an identity of what's going on in this place. Sometimes you want to have, I remember, having people, is it rangers that pick favorite enemies? Maybe there's more than one. They pick a favorite enemy because like in the first game I had like an orc or something, and they're like, yeah, that's going to be my favorite enemy. And then I never play 2 more monsters that are the same ever forever.
Right,
and they're like, what good does this do me? So sometimes it's good to have like the non-fresh, to have like the same kinds of monsters that you would see in the places you would see them, instead of something different every time. So there's that. But you do need to do something to keep it from being monotonous, right? To just be like, another orc runs in with his, whatever weapon. I can't remember right now what weapons orcs have, but let's just say a club. Comes in with his club. Another orc comes in with his club. Okay, 2 more orcs come in with their clubs, and you're like, yeah. So that there's that idea that you do need to change them up, and I think that can happen in ways that you make them memorable, and in ways they fight. Those are the two things you just said there, and I mean it can be just taking time to focus on personality. Even if it's like the same kind of thing they've been facing. We used to talk in Kid about like, okay, you have like 6 orcs. Oh, but this one has the red sash. That's how you know he's like a little bit tougher one, and he's the one that is the leader or whatever. But you can do something besides just a red sash to make your these characters. You have 4 orcs, but it's like 3 of them are sitting there fighting one way, but one's just going crazy, and it's like whoever first hit him or said something to him just becomes his target, and he's like incredibly violent, more than the others, just tearing through, and the whole way he's talking trash to that one person. That's the only one he cares about, and that's how you differentiate him. The others kind of just fight standard. They don't say much, but this one's like constantly talking, and he's always talking to that one person who offended him or hit him first, and that's his, where he's going. You can do stuff like that to make a monster memorable and a little bit different. And that's without really changing up much in the way of their stat block. But then again, when you get to like the way they fight, there's a lot that can be done. And I don't know how far I should go into some of these. I'm just going to kind of throw out some ideas and then let you kind of take it back over here. But I mean, first of all, when you've been playing people who play for a long time, or people who are great internet people, searchers, they're going to quickly identify what it is, look up their stat block, and know all of their weaknesses and strengths. And so I've talked about this before, but one of the things I regularly do is I change something in the stat block, whether it's how strong they are, how much health they have, how hard they hit, a type of hit they have. I do something that they're not going to expect, because anybody can look up anything now. It used to be harder back when only the GM had the monster manual and nobody else did. It was harder for people to know. But even then, you fight long enough, you're going to get to know kind of the abilities. It's amazing like how quickly even when I change up stat blocks, I'll change up ACs. It's not too many hits before they are calling out, okay, you have to have at least a 26 to hit this thing. 24 is the number. 24 is what you got to have to, they figure it out quick. And so, changing up stat blocks, but also I would say, you can add an ability that's not even part of their stat block. Just sometimes take an ability that is nothing like this creature and give at least one of them, maybe 1 or 2 of them, that added thing to the stat block. Sure. To go one step further, you can totally reskin a completely different stat block. You pick something that is just a totally different stat block, and you skin it as an orc who comes in with these other orcs that have a normal stat block. But this one's like not just a little bit changed; it's a completely different creature. But you've made it an orc. That can be really fun, because then they're really confused. It's like that orc's doing some crazy stuff, and you can do that. Now, again, you don't want to be like so completely unfair that your PCs are like, man, nothing makes sense in this game. Nothing makes sense. You don't like that. You want it to have some solid ground, but you want to also occasionally keep them on their toes. And those may be some ways to do that. I have more
Yeah.
stuff here, but I'm gonna kind of throw it back over to you, Adam,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
maybe answer your own question as you're talking about those two
Mhm.
types of things. What
Yeah.
do you see, hear, smell
Right.
versus
Yeah.
combat
Mhm.
style?
Yeah. Yeah. Those two, I think those two facets for me are the things that everything kind of falls under when I'm thinking through like how can I make this monster that people are engaging with? And we're kind of in more the combat side of things, so I'm going to stick with that. Like I do think uh, talking into what a few things you said, like reskinning, I think can be really cool. Um, it may not work to be like, oh, this goblin is actually a dragon, but it looks like a goblin. You know, like that may get a little crazy. And like you said, you want to have some understanding of like this is how the world works in
Mm-hmm.
your game, so that could get wild, but I do think like having a different visual of a stat block can be a really cool way to mix things up. Actually, like a really cool way, and I don't want to tell like the whole story or get into it, but there is a there's a an entity in the second Critical Role season that's essentially I'm generalizing massively, so no hate, please, for anybody who really knows what's going on. But it's like a beholder that has been like that kind of stats have been given to more of a humanoid person who has eyes all over them. And it was like super cool. I wish that I would have done it in a game first because I want to use it so bad. And I'm telling but it's really cool. It was like terrifying for the players in a lot of ways because it never was said, "Oh, this is a beholder and a person," but like that's my way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was a really awesome. So I think like there's probably other ways with maybe creatures who have more like interesting powers using some or all of that even in a different kind of visual form could be really cool, and it's like an engagement of uncertainty for the players and the characters. So that is cool. I like even adding like one unique ability to something basic. So we keep using the orcs, but uh if all of this, maybe not even all of them, but some of these orcs that you're fighting have some sort of maneuver that they do in combat that gives you a condition, so it's like, okay, they all can trip you because of the weapons they're wielding, or they can do this thing. I think with like 5e, there's a way to give creatures like a bonus action that maybe they don't have in the book that can do something condition oriented. So it's like, oh, if you do this, you're knocked prone, or if you do this, you're grappled, and that gives a little more tactic to the thing also, and doesn't give a lot of extra like. I don't think it's going to break the combat to do that, but it makes more options than rather like we stand toe to toe and swing swords at each other, and it's just one more orc that I've dispatched, kind of thing. So a unique ability, and those could be bigger than that, because I do like the idea of adding uh, what I would call like basic abilities of a class. So when I think of like a bard, I think of inspiration. When I think of a rogue, I think sneak attack, and I don't necessarily feel like, oh, I need to put like a full template of a rogue on this hobgoblin over here. But maybe that hobgoblin can have the sneak attack ability. So if it flanks, and it should because it's more regimented, like when it flanks and can do that and gets advantage or whatever, it's going to do a little more damage. It's going to go for the vitals. Or maybe these elves that you're engaging with, one of them is more of a bardic person. So I think you can do that without getting even too crazy in the planning of like, I don't have to build an entire elf bard to do this. I can use the elf stats. I can give them an inspiration thing that they can do to their fellows that they're with. And that's going to make that one feel a little different than just like, okay, they all come at you with bows. Does that make sense with that? So
Mm.
I like to do that kind of thing and kind of build that in.
I heard from a guy once who used to like to do weird combination stuff. So he had two ways he would mainly do this. He would have what he called two-phase fighting, and he would have what he called double roll fighting. And you're like, what? So here's what he did. His two-phase fighting was he would have some monsters that would be coming, but then he would have in his mind planned phase two where they would change. So one of the ones he used to always, well, not used to always, he did a couple times was whatever the animal, you have like magic users of whatever kind, like a shaman or a wizard of whatever the monster is, that you can see pretty clearly is one that uses magic, and as a last desperate attempt, when things seem to be going bad, tries to cast a spell that misfires and changes him into some huge grotesque monster that is a completely different monster.
Yeah, right.
Than anybody expected. And so then he goes into what he calls phase two. So at first you're fighting a wizard, whatever, who's casting some spells, but then in phase two, it turns into some huge lumbering thing without feeling that can lose limbs and not be affected, whatever,
Yeah, right.
So he would have this kind of two-phase effect. The other thing he would do is the two roll. He would like set up a table of monsters, and he would just roll D100, and whatever two monsters came, he would combine the two into one monster, because nobody's ever ready for electric weasels or marsupial poisonous toads or whatever it was. He would just take whatever the two things were and cram them together into something and make it happen. And so that was one way to keep, you could even use some of those lesser animals that you don't use in most things, like a dire rat mixed with a centaur. So you have a, dire sin rat. That's not a thing. But he would do that. He would smash together whatever two he happened to roll. Now, sometimes that can be a little, like we said, it can be a little odd. What is this thing doing here? Sometimes it can be fun just to spark your imagination. And sometimes you may just choose two different things, not necessarily roll on a table. You may choose two things and smash them together and combine their stat blocks, combine, what they even look like. And your players may be like, what in the world? Mm-hmm. So that's another couple ways you can freshen monsters as well.
Yeah.
There's also this idea that you don't have to have just one type of monster everywhere you go. And I think most GMs kind of do this already, but remember that it's not just you walk in, there's 6 of these monsters. Then you go in the next room, there's 2 of these monsters. You could fight this guy, but he could get away and blow a horn that calls back the party that was behind you that you had skirted successfully, as well as call in the bugbear from the next room and, the whatever. And then suddenly you got this these closing people in on you of all different types of monsters at the same time. And then their tactics together could be something that is very unexpected.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because I think sometimes it feels like you're going through a dungeon or something, and it's like everything is in a vacuum. It's like a video game. It's like nobody ever gets called in from the other rooms, no matter how much violence is happening. It's like things just exploded, but I'm just going to sit here and eat my soup until they come through the door, And, I think that's a really good point of, in combat, that being a thing. I had written down like tactics, movement, in retreat, and I think that falls into that of a thing I've been thinking about a lot lately in combats is, how to put this, the optimal, sometimes I've been really concerned about the optimal damage I can do to a party. And it's like, well, how can I make this super as difficult as possible, is kind of the thought process of I don't want them to feel like this was a worthless fight. So if none of them get hit at all, then I'm worried about that kind of stuff. And but we're thinking more about choosing to not optimize in that way and make there be movement in a battle. And it's not optimal for the whatever creature is you're attacking to um, disengage from you and go run over and hit somebody else, because it's like a wasted movement, because we're thinking in like bonus actions or move standard, or like whatever you're in, we're thinking about the economy of actions a lot of times. But if like we were in like a big brawl, in reality there's going to be people falling over and pushing each other across the room, and the table's going to get broken, and this crazy stuff's going to be happening, rather than just like we're not just standing there slugging each other, taking a hit, so, kind of thing. And so I've thought a lot about that, and wanting to implement that more, of people moving about the room, maybe making choices that are not the greatest for like just doing damage to the party, but like making it more interesting. And the thing about like retreating that you just said, like running into the other room to raise the alarm, I think that's a really good usage for, any GMs out there that are like running a dungeon crawl or things. Like, what I like with that, and this is getting a little maybe outside of what we're talking about, this is more about the adventure rather than the creature, but if you give maybe a round of, the orc goes running for the door, but they don't get there and run through the door yet, you're giving the party a chance to not just like shoot spells at these attackers, but I got to stop him before he gets through the door and tells everybody else, kind of thing, and it's like another objective, which I really like objectives in battle. So that, I think that one shows like, okay, not everybody's just going to stand here and die, which really is very unrealistic anyway. we do that a lot, but it's like not super realistic. But they're not just going to stand here until they're dead. But also now I have another thing to do other than just shoot my arrow at this orc over here. So I think that can be like really helpful with tactics, movements, and rolls.
Josh just put something in here about the fact that we build our parties in a certain way. And sometimes you can build the enemies in that way too. It's not just a bunch of fighters come in and you guys decimate them in your various ways, but he's saying that, like, don't forget, there would be a spellcaster in this. There would be a healer, someone who just stands back, and you think you just like knock this guy out, and then all of a sudden he gets healed, and the three guys around you that you just knocked to the ground all stand back up full of health, and this guy over here is shooting fire at you, and that guy's doing, think about all the roles you do for a player party. Those kinds of things can happen, and that's one of the beautiful things about things like orcs. They'll have like orc fighters, and then they'll have orc champions, then they'll have orc shamans, and they'll have orc, so they have like this full array to choose from, put together a band, not just 6 orcs. Put together like a mix.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's good. One caveat I think I'll throw into that is, especially if you're new, don't overwhelm yourself with having like 10 different types of creature the first time you run a combat, kind of thing. And like, that goes back to know what their stat blocks are, like know what spells they're casting. That's important. Because I've been in that situation too, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this, like, we're gonna have the front line, we're gonna have the archers over here, the healers back in the back, there's a spellcaster gonna be slinging stuff, and then I realize, shoot, I'm flipping between like all these pages and the battle's bogged down. So there is like a threshold to be aware of, I think, with that, but it does make it a lot more interesting, in my opinion, to have all that rather than just like a bunch of guys with swords.
And again, that's where the electronic versions of things can be a little easier, because you plop them in and then you just click arrow, arrow, arrow for the archers, sword, 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 so you're not flipping anything. You're just like clicking the button that, this guy's going to do this, this guy's going to do this. And then always when you get the spellcasters, you got to be a little more researched.
I think in that realm, like just if you want to look, if you're like a 5e person particularly, I feel like the drow section of the 5e book is really helpful to think about with that, because they have different types, and they fit into those roles really well. So you can kind of like see them all side by side about like how they can play, and then maybe convert that over into another thing. So for anybody playing in that system, that's a really helpful thing. The not to like shift here, but the other facet was more like just kind of the idea of a creature. And I do want to like talk into that a little bit too. We can go back to combat stuff if we have things, but um something, and I'll probably mention this one again. I know I have before. There's a podcast called Monster Man that is really good, I think, for like thinking about monsters, and it's a pretty short, like 7 to 10 minutes typically for an episode. So it's an easy one to like go for a walk and listen to, or do some dishes and listen to, kind of thing. But he does a really good job. James Holloway does a really good job of talking through monsters and giving some, like, I think, freshness as he looks into the history of them. And one of the things he's brought up before that like I wanted to kind of toss out to begin with was the idea, and you can't do this for everything, but the idea of like in history, like legend, like our like myths about monsters, a lot of times there are like, it's singular. It's like a singular creature, like the Minotaur, kind of thing. And the Minotaur is in the labyrinth. That's where it is. There's not like a race of Minotaurs. There's the one that they deal with, kind of thing. Or Medusa gets a little weird. It's kind of like Medusa, I think, is one of those, but then there's the Gorgons, so I get kind of confused. But that kind of thing of like, there's like this one creature, and I don't think you can do that for like, obviously you don't want to for every single monster in the monster manual, but I think that's a really interesting way to make things a little more unique when we're used to it being like, well, yeah, there's like beholders all across the world, and you just happen to be running into this one. Like, what if it's just like the whatever creature? I think there's like a importance isn't the right word, but there's like a more of weightiness to that creature if it's like that's the one that you're dealing with. And I don't know if you like experienced that in a game or used it in that way before, Matthew, for your stuff.
I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head of that, but yeah, I agree. I think having that definite article makes a difference in the players' minds when they're like, "This is the something." And
Right.
again, it's harder to do with like you can't say this is the orc. There are certain things that are known as a race, but you can
Right.
say this is the, and then some adjective orc, the jade orc. This is the only
Yeah.
one there
Right.
is,
Right.
and because of that can give it that weightiness, that uniqueness.
Yeah. Well, that's sorry. That makes like the thing you said about using you're talking about with the ranger and having like recurring enemies. Um that reminds me of that, even of like, that's not like a unique, there's only one. But I think about like go back to Tolkien for me. So you have the orcs, but then you have like the Uruk-hai are this like kind of other beefier, more man-sized, like orc kind of thing. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of takes on that, but they start seeing those and it's like, oh, this is a different kind of thing. I think that's interesting, like the jade orc, or, and that could be an individual or
Right.
a new, kind of thing that happens to have some of these abilities we talked about. So sorry, just jumping in on that, but
No, I like
yeah,
that.
yeah. The kind of in that same line of like making it singular, and some of the stuff that Monster Man's talked about. I found it interesting and am wanting to use this more, of actually looking back at like our history is not the right word, our legend with some monsters, because I think like maybe a freshening. It's almost like I feel like we both play music sometimes, and every now and then I'll like pull out an old song and people are like, whoa, that's awesome. You know, and it's like, well,
Hmm.
this is like 40 years old, you know, kind of thing, but
Yeah.
great, you know, and it's taken as new and fresh, but it's like, no, this actually is so old that you don't even know it, you know, kind of thing. And I wonder that with monsters too. And it's another thing I think Monster Man's taught me a little bit is like we have this like monster manual and there's this talk about like how these monsters work, but the like influences for those monsters way back when like Gary Gygax was making, you know, creatures for the first time, it's like he's using influences from myth and legend. And I think a lot of those have like they've obviously shifted because sometimes things work better with like an RPG than they do in a story that's being told or whatever. But I think we can look back at some of those things and see the differences in, you know, the way like a fairy in D&D is treated versus like what do the Fae look like in Irish
Hmm.
folklore, you know, kind of thing. And um, that's something like I've been trying to do a little more and like paying more attention to that like recently. And it was more of a encounter that you guys kind of went through and passed, but like the oh man, I always mess up the words. Scylla and Charybdis, I think, is the thing. It's like Greek, the whirlpool, and then there's the creature up on the cleft, and you have to like sail between them. Like that was a thing, you know. I put you guys through on the Jade Masks game.
And interestingly enough, someone knew the reference and
Yes,
they
yeah.
brought it up.
I wasn't trying to necessarily like hide that, but I was not wanting to be like, oh yeah, this is, you know, this situation. And yeah, I got called out right away. But that was fun to like look back and not just like, that was not a monster manual thing. You know, it was, what's some stuff from history that's like naval, like sailing oriented. Oh, this could be cool to bring that in from, is that the Odyssey that I think it's the Odyssey that he encounters that with. So, so that's a way I think that by using an old way of thinking, you could even freshen RPG monsters is like looking back at their actual like myth a little bit and saying like, well, how were they like thought of and treated in that realm kind of thing.
And you can also do something, start with your imagination.
Mhm.
Think what creature is this like, but don't discount like giving restrictions as well. So I
Yeah.
think we've talked in here once that I had our party going to retrieve something from the Eye King, and it was this. Basically, it was like a beholder, but instead of beholders fly around and whatever, this thing was huge,
Mhm.
and it was like strapped into a bunch of trees in this like. It could not move.
Yeah.
It had some differences, but I started with just imagining them kind of going after something and what would it be like. And then I began to like think about, okay, what are some abilities that creatures already have in D&D? And I put some of those here and some of those here, and I
Yeah.
restricted
Right.
some of the stuff, and it makes it completely different. But again, it's like starting from a place that's different than just thumbing through the book, which is a cool way to go too, to
Right.
just thumb through the book, find something you love that's cool, and think reverse engineer. How do I get them to
Yeah.
fight this?
Right. Yeah.
That can happen. But you can also start with your imagination being in a place that's not a book monster,
Mhm.
and then letting yourself kind of create what that's going to be, which is something that when you're first starting is a little more daunting. When you're first starting, you're like, I don't know how this all go or how it's going to balance. I'd rather have something that has a stat block and a CR and
Mhm.
a challenge rating, and I'm just going to stick with that until you get your feet under you, and that's okay. It's like when my
Yeah.
kids were learning to draw. They start by tracing
Mhm.
a horse, and
Right.
then they trace enough horses, and they get the idea that this is how a horse's leg is constructed. It's different than a human's. It bends differently,
Yeah.
and then they can start to draw horses on their own in different poses once they've traced enough horses. And so you
Right.
start tracing using the stuff you find in the monster manual, and then you begin to like put it into your own poses, and then you begin to kind of create on your own,
Yeah.
and that's a natural progression.
For sure. Yeah. I like that a lot. There's a thing that like kind of fits into the idea of the creature that I don't think requires any um like the history legend stuff that's going to require a little research, and changing stats like does require thoughts. You don't want to probably do that in the immediate, like I'm playing a game right now, I'm going to add this orc can cast fireball suddenly, kind of thing.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Well, maybe you do want to. I don't know. I want to do that a lot, but something that what I'm trying to get at is like maybe that doesn't require a ton of like outside stuff, is that like mystery and like withholding even a little bit of a monster can go a long way to, I think, players engaging. And there's two forms of that are kind of different, but one is like I talked about foreshadowing with the yellow-haired child earlier. I do think like, okay, you come into a town and people are like, hey, we've been being assailed by a creature. And instead of them saying, hey, we're being assailed by a werewolf, they're going to say, there's a monster out in the mists that takes the form of a beast, and it comes and takes people away into the night and has been killing, like that kind of stuff. There's definitely a different feel to, if I'm a player hearing one or the other. If I hear there's a werewolf, I'm going to be like, even if I'm trying very hard not to, it's like, okay, maybe some silver stuff. Like, what do we need to do to protect ourselves from, and that immediately there's some meta things that happen in my brain. If I'm just said, you're about to fight a werewolf versus there's this mysterious creature out in the dark that's like stealing people away. It takes the form of a beast, and so I think like the foreshadowing of that, of not giving all the info when you're like talking to people who have engaged with the creature, that can build some tension too. And maybe there's some like anticipation to meeting that. And I guess like it's connected to that, but even like, okay, you step into a room and there is a troll that's pulling itself out of a pile of sludge and it comes after you with a club. But like, that's fine, and there was some description there, but I think even explaining what a creature looks like, but not naming it in that situation is also like really, there's a difference there of just like the feel around the table. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So that can help even with, it doesn't change any of the stats. It doesn't change any of that stuff, but like, it's just a feel. There's a feel that's different. So really, encourage in that of just take a little bit of time to explain. You don't need to like overburden the scene with, loquacious descriptions of all these things, but like just giving a little bit enough and not naming it exactly is pretty helpful to me. So, yeah.
Josh threw into our chat, Whippicorn. I have no idea what he was commenting on there. Whippicorn is from the Sentinels card game. You play this one enemy called the Dreamer. It's actually a 6-year-old girl, or a 6 health point girl that you're trying to keep alive. But she's dreaming up. She's in this kind of a coma or something. She's dreaming these phantasms. And you have to fight them while keeping her alive. Anyway, I like the idea of borrowing from other games.
Yeah.
There are some, like, especially in that Sentinels, there are some creatures that come up in there, or the tactics they use to fight, even in just the Dreamer alone. Like several of her creatures, and the one guy comes out and gives everybody else DR, while he's alive and stuff. You could use those kinds of tactics to keep your monsters, say you're using the orcs, but you have one of them who is secretly giving everybody else damage reduction. What do they call that in Pathfinder? In
DR.
It is.
Yeah, you can still use
they call
DR.
it DR. That's right. But something like a Whippicorn, this, and again, you describe it. You don't tell what it is. You say this, huge horse that stands taller than most horses, but has a horn that's got this long leathery thing. And it's whipping its head around, and it slaps one of you. Suddenly, you feel weaker, unable to do anything. You can't attack for a whole round. You figure out ways to like make it happen. But That is good. Monsters You
Yeah.
Can Dream of, he says.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it is cool. Think of we talk about inspirations. We talked about movies and books, other
Mhm.
games. Other
Yeah.
games have some cool monsters. Not everything is in the world of D&D that you could put in. And again, we're
Sure.
not just talking D&D. There's, you could do any of this in
Yeah.
Starfinder. You could do any of this in Red Markets. That
Yeah.
that would be odd to see something like that there, but you could.
Mhm. Yeah. The way aberrants work or things like that. So
Right.
yeah, that's cool. So there's some
Um,
thoughts. Some thoughts there.
feel like one of the other ways that I had in mind about keeping monsters from getting stale is to remember that it's not only about the monsters either.
Mm.
Remember that you're going to have an environment, and do think about the ways you can have never have an empty room, right? So
Mhm.
there's always cover. There are traps that are going to go off. There are cages that have to be opened or closed
Yeah.
or gotten through. There are puzzles. There are levers around that could be pulled, and you don't know what they're going to do. And these things all also keep it from just being like you walk in and you fight. You
Yeah.
walk in and you
Yep.
fight.
Yep.
You walk in and you fight. Again,
Mhm.
just think about what's around as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's some questions coming up that get into this, and I don't want to like walk over those, but I think that idea, like even you saying you just walk in and you fight, you just walk in and you fight, that like there are creatures you can come across that it's like a fight is not necessarily what we have to be going for, either kind of thing. And I think that's a shift in my own like GMing mindset that I've had over time of always thinking like encounter means battle. Like, and I don't think it has to, like encounter is like literally you have an obstacle put in front of you. So we keep using this, but the trio of orcs stands before you, and it's like, well, we could fight and we'll probably win, or we could talk it out, and maybe this is a possibility of diplomacy here or tricking, or those kind of things. And um, I think that can like maybe the mindset of the GM leaving it open that you don't have to say you see three orcs before you roll initiative. There's times when that's a lot of fun, but maybe like let it play out before it's like, okay, now let's roll initiative because the other things have not worked. You tried to persuade and you crit one, they pull their swords. We're going for this, kind of thing. So that's been a change in my brain too, of just trying to not necessarily like force everyone to fight every creature that they ever come across, but like allowing for some extra stuff in there.
And it can even heighten the fight.
Yeah.
Three guys in red robes are running at you, and you think, oh, they look like they're being chased, and you help them, and then they stab you in the back because
Right.
they were really the bad guys all along, and then you hate them, and then when you do fight them, oh, how fun!
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love it. Love it.
Here's the other part, though. Do be careful that you don't just have so much interaction that there's never combat.
Yeah.
Part of what people like is they want to get in here and do something they don't do all the time in their real
Right.
life, and that is
Yeah.
fight things. And so sometimes you can get like so clever that you're having all these discussions and these like skill challenges and these like talks, and they're making friends and they're figuring out these motives, and then nobody ever rolls or fights, lifts a sword, and everybody's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll see y'all next week. And you're like, yeah, I kind of lost something there. So
Yeah.
keep that balance.
For sure. For sure.
Well, hey, anything else about monsters? I know we got some questions in the Haversack about monsters, and we're going to kind of hit some of those. Anything else before we move to our NPC that you have?
No, I think that can guide some convo here in a bit. So
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hit our NPC. Adam's going to be getting this one for us. Our NPC from Masks, the book by Noam Stew. So who do we got?
Najir Matrell, the Inspired Tracker. His quote is, "Don't hold back your fear. It makes everything sweeter." So he is bulky and strong. Najir bears the scars of many battles and carries many cruel-looking weapons. The cold and calculating look on his face is enough to intimidate most of his targets. His wild and dirty appearance belies his intelligence, another one of his strengths. Najir will track anything for anyone so long as they're paying. Those who get on the wrong side of his deductive mind or in cruel, calculating ways rarely escape from him. His personality was born to a life of cruelty. He has little sympathy for his quarry, and he remains focused on the work at all times. Any close interaction with Najir quickly reveals his sharp mind. He loves the thrill of the hunt, seeing it like a fatal chess game for his body and mind. He would love to find an adversary who could outwit and outfight him. His background: there was no love for Najir in his filthy hovel, and there was rarely enough food for the entire family until Najir started hunting. That is, in the woods, Najir learned to watch and learn the patterns of his prey before striking. He studied animals and other hunters, picking up techniques and developing incredible new ones. He quickly got bored hunting animals and moved to hunting people. He never cares who he hunts, just that they provide a challenge and that he gets paid. Najir studies his quarry for many days before striking. So Najir Matrell.
Yeah. So always when we do these, they're not paired up, but I almost always think of the encounter we have and then the NPC we have. And so you remember the leader who was kind of off on his own, but watching everybody. I start to think of this guy in there, and this idea that he's kind of ruthless and loves the thrill of it, where the other ones, a couple of them are wanting to like try to extort the church. One of them's wanting to destroy the prophecy, but he's got a different plan in mind. And so he could be somehow put in there. But yeah, this idea of a guy who he basically wants to hunt humans at all costs. It doesn't mean that he is going to necessarily do something criminal or bad or make your party against him. But he, could be in that role, or could be someone you work with or against.
Right. Yeah. I was, in terms of that encounter, like I do like that idea of him being that leader, or just later on it's somebody who's coming in and maybe hunting one of these yellow-haired boys, or hunting
you, since you have the knowledge of the prophecy.
Right. I think that's interesting. And it's like you said, you don't necessarily have to be at odds with him. I had a lot of thoughts. You had brought up Sentinels, and I was thinking of there's Ambuscade, is the guy who he gets bored with hunting animals and turns to bigger quarry. And so he's wanting to hunt superheroes because of that. And I find that kind of interesting, just as a personality thing of there's the challenge, and almost I want to meet somebody who can defeat me, kind of thing. So that is interesting, I think, as far as seeing this as a person who's maybe in the world, who you're hearing rumors about and things like that of, there's this person who is doing these kind of feats and fighting powerful people and defeating them because he's on this quest to basically be defeated by somebody eventually. It's kind of a weird mindset.
It's kind of the opposite of the Moriarty, right? Moriarty, if I can say that right. Sherlock Holmes, he wants someone who is his equal, but he's being chased. And this guy is the chaser. But he wants someone who is his equal to chase, not just somebody easy to catch.
Right. Yeah, I think about you guys are kind of out of it in the game that I'm running, but starting in the Thieves Guild kind of situation, I feel like this could have been a guy who would have been part of the Thieves Guild even, and could have even been turning down jobs. No, this is not difficult enough for my tastes, kind of thing of, I don't need to track down those people, that anyone can do that. I need to go after bigger and badder quarry kind of thing. So even having a kind of a strange peer kind of relationship in that situation could have been an interesting thing with him. Yeah. I like the Moriarty kind of connection there. It's good.
So there you go. An NPC. Maybe you could drop into a campaign that you're using, has this kind of personality and this kind of extensive ability and confidence.
Right.
And that could be your NPC.
Sure.
Let's jump over to our haversack.
Yeah.
We've got lots of questions in the haversack this week. We'll see how many we can get to here.
Yeah. So we have one question from Wataya Hotel. And then our friend Eric, who was on talking about like solo play and table kind of driven adventures a while ago now, has sent us a pretty large list of them that I think is going to speak into some of these things we were talking. So we'll start with Wataya's here. He says, Dear Matthew and Adam, I wanted to ask about how you should go about spicing up basic monsters for your veteran players. You probably covered a lot of this in your episode, but I'm curious to see how you keep things from getting stale for players who have fought thousands of bandits and skeletons but need to fight creatures at their PC's current level. For example, I'm currently running a campaign for a group of players who are a mix of new and experienced tabletop gamers, but one of them even has his own RPG podcast. Let's call it Schmize of the Shmishmem for now.
He's not talking about me.
This can be a little intimidating, to say the least. Yeah. So how do I engage my veteran players without killing their low-level characters? Thanks all. Wataya Hotel 98. One thing I'll say, and this is just me, but after having talked about all this stuff, like I just need to be less entertained than I think. Like I don't want it. What am I trying to say?
Like, I think you're trying to say this, that when you're a veteran player and there's new players, you don't need like the hardest and biggest, baddest, craziest things that like overwhelm you. Right. Part of your joy is like paying attention to all the detail and playing your role and like watching the people who are newer like struggle and you getting in there and doing your part. I don't like when you say, how do I engage my veteran player without killing? I think you work for the lower level characters and your veteran player is veteran enough that he doesn't have to have more. Yeah. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's perfect. Yes. I think that's good. And like, I mean, we're talking about this stuff because it is a thing. Like monsters becoming dry and stale are it is a thing. But I do think there's some player agency too. And I think we should talk player agency a little bit and like best practices as a player sometime probably as well. But there's a bit of that where it's like I'm excited to get into those things, but engaging them without killing low level characters. Like I think a lot of the stuff that we did talk about plays into that of just like making them interesting in a different way. I do think you can, you can scale things to be lower level if that's like what you're wanting to go for, where it's like maybe a more intense thing. Obviously don't want to put like an ancient red dragon in front of your level 1 characters unless you're planning on it being a campaign about becoming new characters, but yeah, I don't know. Matthew, you have more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that veteran players, if they're okay, so when I sit down with my kids who haven't done as much gaming as me, I get a joy from watching them be excited about like kobolds and, whatever, orcs. We always talk about orcs or trolls or whatever that I've seen a million times, but they haven't. And there's part of that joy is me introducing them to that. And it's the same thing with a veteran player playing with new players. Part of what you love is seeing people's first reactions to that stuff. As a veteran player, there is a bit of the burden that falls on me to help storytell. So let's say you bring us up against a bunch of, I think in this dorm at mine, I brought everybody up against kobolds because we had a bunch of people who had never played before, but Adam has played like a billion times. He's seen kobolds in and out, like, more than he's ever cared to. But that didn't mean that it had to be, they had to run across a field full of bear traps to get to these kobolds shooting at them with little crossbows. And then when they got there, it was behind this tree that they had to jump over and a cave they had to go in. So again, I'm using my idea. It's not just kobolds standing in an empty room. Right. use your environment. But then as a veteran player, he can like add to it. He's like, I jump over and this thing's up above me. I swing my sword, and and you tell the story. You teach other people. How do you go about role playing more than just like roll my dice, here's the result. Roll my dice, here's the result. You tell the story. So I wouldn't worry. I know that as a GM, so I used to teach at the university level. And I remember when I first started teaching, it was as soon as I finished my master's degree, and I was teaching senior level interviewing class. So the truth is, I had 2 years of a master. Actually, I was in my master's degree, and I was teaching this class that was seniors, people just like a year or two behind me. And I remember being so intimidated because I'm going in to talk to people who are not freshmen. They're like, they know how this is going. So it's the same sort of thing. You come in as this GM and you're like, I know this person's a veteran. They know a lot already. And you feel intimidated. But the truth is that you can do a fine game for them, and you don't have to have that nervousness that maybe you're feeling.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. My brain's going a bunch of different places, and the something that like may work, but it's situational. So in the Jade Masks game, the group, I had put, they encountered a hag. She was kind of a Baba Yaga type person and super high level, and it should not have been a combat by all intents and purposes. Should not have been a combat, but it became a combat because the guys wanted to go for justice and not.
That's what characters do.
Yeah, that's what heroes do. But it really was, and I wasn't like being a jerk, but she was so high level that it was like she sat down in a chair the entire fight and was just like stun, fear, miss me. Like it was very the power level was very different, and again, this is not every fight. Like you're probably not going to do this with an ogre who's too big for them. But for her, it was like a more intelligent creature being like, this is not even worth my time, which also was like salt in the wound for all these party members, of like, they're wanting to do something about this problem. And she's like, this isn't even worth my time to sit here and have this fight. I'm out, kind of thing. And I think there's some of those maybe, I wouldn't want to like overplay that by any means. And that was very specific to her and that encounter. But I think you can sometimes even have like a pretty big discrepancy in power level and that be still doable. Another example with that was, which like behind the curtain a little bit, they actually almost won. There was an archmage that was fought like early on in the campaign too. And I actually thought it was like, the power struck is so like off. There's no way. And then you guys all like just wailed on him. It's a Korrikan, the guy in Tifa's Edge. I don't know if you remember that, Matthew. And he like jumped you guys because you'd stolen from him. And I'm like, we did what was supposed to happen. But for a while, I was like, they're going to kill him. This is going to get, this went poorly. But,
luckily, in that case, he sent me to another dimension. So he lived.
In that case, it was like, he heard the city watch come in and was like, okay, it's not worth it. And like left before the battle, kind of he teleported out or something. But I think there's ways, and maybe some of that is a little bit too heavy handed, but I think it's okay to put a pretty hard, difficult, like people, but then the end result does not have to be one of us is dead, kind of thing. Like maybe the end result is I may need to incapacitate these people, but then I'm going to leave them alive. That it kind of depends on the creature. So,
and again, with this question, I think the whole thing, when you look at it, how do I engage my veteran players without killing their low level characters? Right. It's about storytelling. It's not about putting up something hard. I think where you have a more difficult time is when you have one character who's super powerful, and we've talked about this before, in your party, and everybody else is a lot weaker. How do you keep from killing all the other party, but making it a challenge for that one guy? I think that's a lot harder than this. When you just have veteran players and then like low-level characters of new players, I think it's more just about making sure you're telling good story.
Right.
and then put up the low level enemies.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Thanks for that question. Um, we have a series of questions again from Eric. And he says this, Dear CNA, oops, wrong podcast. I mean, M&A. That's a Letters Page Sentinels of the Multiverse reference there for you guys who haven't listened to that before. So, M&A. I've been a long time listener, one time guest, and now first time questioner.
Oh,
Gentlemen, I bring you some monstrous queries. Feel free to answer as few or as many as you would like. We'll try to answer all of them today, hopefully. So, one, when encountering monsters, violence is often the chosen solution or even the expected solution in many game systems such as D&D or Pathfinder. What are some ways that you make monsters evil enough or dangerous enough within the narrative that players feel compelled to resort to combat?
And if you're reading this on a screen, it says, how do you make monsters evil eno?
Oops.
That's supposed to be enough and dangerous enough. It just didn't all fit on there. We didn't realize. So how do we make monsters evil enough or dangerous enough that they decide, yeah, we've got to take this one out? I think it comes back to doing things most of the time. I'll say most of the time because right now I have we have a table with several evil characters, but most of the time you have heroes who are like, they have this sense of justice, they have this sense of right in the world. And all you have to do is have a monster violate that uncaringly. That's usually enough. It usually doesn't take much to get PCs to decide this is somebody worth killing. But if you really want to make them like not question, oh, should we save this guy? Is this the right thing to do? All you have to do is have them like, hurt someone who is like not very powerful, like a child or a woman, or a poor shopkeeper who's trying to just fend for his family. Yeah, introduce an injustice, and then they're ready to go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, It's. I'm trying to think about that question because I feel like our default is. It's like, man, I've had a tough week. I'm ready to smash some skeletons tonight, kind of thing. It's like the default is we woke up and chose violence, I guess. But I think that kind of adding to I have talked about in red markets before, the surest way to get a group, no matter who they are and like whatever their kind of alignment, if you want to use that's not really a term for that, but the alignment, like good or evil or whatever. But it's like, if in that game, if I have ever put anybody up against like a group of people who are enslaving other people, it's on. Like there's no possibility that that's not a battle that's about to happen, and it's like, I think like what you said, Matthew, like if you introduce some sort of injustice thing or just like, I don't know, barbarism may not be the right word, but like these creatures that maybe are a little more aggressive, animalistic kind of thing. It's like they are not going to back down. Like this is going to happen. Like I think that's going to throw people into that. So this is
going to go right into the next question too. So I'm going to let you throw that next question before I add to this.
Yeah. I've recently been drawn to more non-violent solutions to encounters, Eric says, even with monsters. What are some non-violent and interesting resolutions of monster encounters that ascending GMs could incorporate as options in their own games?
And so I said this kind of related because it's the opposite of what he just said. I think whenever you come upon a monster, if you introduce a level of intelligence that's higher than animalistic, the higher up you go on that scale, the more players get like hesitant, like not necessarily. I guess they could still be doing like horrible injustices, and it would still be a battle. But let's say you introduce just a glimmer of a conscience or a hesitation in doing evil, an intelligence that has an inquisitiveness to it. These are the kinds of things that we value, like inquisitive, a sense of morality. Any of those, you give a little spark of that in there. and your players will kind of pull up short. They'll stop
Mhm.
short. Now, there are some players that I don't care what you introduce, like a fairy godmother lands. I kill her with my sword. There are some people who are going to do that. But
Yeah.
most people, if they see something that looks like the least bit promising of redemption,
Mhm.
oh, that redemption's like a big thing that players love to
Yeah, right.
also enact, just like they
Yeah.
love to enact justice. You want to tell these stories of redemption. And so, even if it was someone who has been evil in the past, but like there's this glimmer of like questioning their own past and what they've done,
Mhm.
that'll be enough often for PCs to at least not kill them outright. Maybe they'll like, beat them down, but keep them conscious
Yeah.
to like talk to them, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you can begin to like show that there could be any sort of redemption. And again, this whole thing of the nonviolent, you have some orcs standing there, but like one of them is shrewd and like begins to converse. There could be
Mhm.
resolutions that are different in all kinds of ways, and
Right.
I'm failing to come up with any off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Going with your like that glimmer of something like uh I unashamedly, one of my favorite movies is How to Train Your Dragon. And there's this, Hiccup's like about to kill Toothless after he's captured him at the beginning before he realizes that he's wants to be friends with dragons. And there's this moment where Toothless like looks at him and then kind of like turns away. And later, when he's explaining it, like hopefully I'm not ruining a movie that came out who knows how long ago, but
spoilers.
spoiler alert, don't listen, move ahead 30 seconds. Uh he's explaining, I don't have the exact quote, but it's like, I looked at him and saw myself in him was kind of the idea that he gives.
Yeah.
And like I think that does play a role of them seeing that, and like you said, raising the intelligence level of a creature that maybe was unexpectedly intelligent. um or I maybe a little more like practical to end, like not non-violent interesting resolutions, that like creatures are not willing to fight to begin with, that you expect to be, or they like parlay, they surrender right away, they initially run away from you because you're more powerful than they are. like those kind of things, I think, or even if a battle has happened, I think there's some interest even of like, what if instead of the killing blow being struck, like the creature throws down its weapon and gets on its knees and surrenders? Like, one, there's like a moral conundrum that gets put in front of that, which sometimes you're like, man, again, my week's been too tough. I don't really want those put in front of me in a game. But like that happens where you have to make a choice. Um, but that also shows more than just like, well, I'm a bag of hit points. It's going to stand here until I die with a creature kind of thing. So that, or I feel like I'm veering from the question, but one of the things I've liked is even at times playing with internal uh hostilities within a group that the PCs are like engaging with. So you're in the middle of a fight, and the group of orcs that you're fighting actually has two factions in it, or there's like one guy who hates the other one, and in the middle of them fighting you, the one that hates the other one actually stabs him in the back, aiding you.
That's still violent.
It's still violent, but it's like, but after he's killed that guy, then he's happy to like, whatever, I just took power. I don't need to fight you all. Like, we're laying down our arms. Like, again, I guess it's a surrender thing, but it is violent, but maybe it's interesting and can be a
And one thing that you have to be careful of too is one of our people watching right now just commented, "Oh, I love nonviolent solutions, but it's hard to keep the numbskulls at bay." Sometimes you have a player who is like all about like, okay, let's work out a negotiation here, let's bargain, but then you get, his friend runs in like swinging the hammer,
right.
and it's over.
Yeah, and that's kind of on the players, I guess, at that point where you can't control. Like, I mean, we don't want to be in a place where like, no, you do not strike them. Like, that's not cool, to do that. So they kind of have to be on board too. Yeah.
All right, what else we got?
All right, continuing on with Eric's questions here. What's the most memorable monster that you have encountered in gaming? Perhaps it's the one that absolutely frightened you to the core, the player, not the character, or the most epic creature your character ever crossed swords with, or the one that is the most fun to run as the GM. I would say so.
Me too.
I
Kind of.
I love. I mentioned the Beholder earlier, but I really have enjoyed running a Beholder. Like I really like running the Beholder. I got to do that in this game that we're running now a while ago, and that's like super fun because there's a lot of options and you can just do a lot of things. So that I think that's what my favorite actually to have run is probably a Beholder because I actually felt like I did it right this time too. Like that was one I think in the past I've like used one and been like, oh, I like forgot these three things. But as far as like coming across, I may have mentioned the Eye King before, and I know you just did, Matthew, but like that was a really cool creature to me of like I kind of get the idea, but also this is so much different than what I had expected it to be. And it had a good visual too. And actually Eric that's asking this question, I got to see like I think do like a flying drop kick to it from off of a tree. And then I'm going to throw one more out, like kind of in the realm too. Weirdly enough, Matthew, your first campaign, the first campaign, the Oracle of Order, that Etten, the Etten, for some reason sticks with me. Like that is an image in my brain of being terrified because I think like I just like I kind of had an idea of like that thing is too big for us. We should not know. And I think that was the first time I had ever really like engaged in a way of like this is not something we should mess with. And I like knew it and I was scared.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was like the very first thing you guys came
Very
against
first
as
thing.
level 1 characters, which
Yeah.
should have scared you. I don't think it scared everybody.
Yeah, it scared me. Josh says mustard jelly. That was a terrible one too. Just could not get past it.
We did have a fight. It was that I think the first fight that group of characters ever decided we got to run.
Yeah, right.
And that's always an important turning point when they realize there are some things we just can't beat.
Yeah.
So I'm drawing a blank on like I know that there are creatures, monsters that you would like mention, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that one was awesome. Oh, that was awesome. That was fun. But for some reason today, I am not coming up with them. So they'll come out in other episodes. I will bring up stories, and then you'll be like, why didn't you answer that?
We can come back to it for sure.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question to that. How do you make monsters more memorable? And is that even a worthy goal? Do you give them personalities, an ecology, a purpose, a recurring role, or red sashes? Question mark. So making
I think
them more
for me, it's not every monster. You want some monsters to be faceless minions, and then you want some monsters to be memorable characters. Mm-hmm. And you have to choose on those. And I think it should be a ratio that is not very much on the memorable characters, more on the faceless minions. Occasionally, I think you can like choose 2 or 3 from the onslaught of, trolls, orcs, kobolds, whatever you want it to be, that have something that you play up, characterize them in a certain way. And they may still die or whatever. But like when one gets characterized enough or gets unique enough that it becomes a story element, then that's not something that you just kind of kill immediately and go on. That's something that then gets bigger. And so is it a worthy goal? Sometimes. Sometimes you want there to be like something that sticks in people's memory, that sticks around longer, that becomes part of the bigger story. And when you do that, just be prepared that if you're going to make them very memorable, they're going to become part of your story. And the more you give them a personality, the more likely that they're going to become part of your story. So you
Yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
that with everything, or else you're going to have way too much going on in your story.
Right.
So occasionally you do want to make them memorable, and occasionally you do give them a personality or a purpose or a recurring role. Maybe not so much the red sash. The red sash is still going to be killed, right? But those other three things, if they come back more than once or twice, they become part of your story. If they have a purpose that they're pursuing besides just blind killing, they're going to become part of your story. If they have a personality, they're probably going to become part of your story. So,
Right.
so be sparing on that. But yeah, sometimes that's absolutely what makes that kobold different from every other kobold and become something that they remember long after that story's over.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I have anything more to add. Maybe the like I think the ecology can be not necessarily memorable for um it's more like this. I think the scene becomes more memorable with the ecology kind of idea of uh there are specific um in the WoW game, like a thing that's like really strong in my brain. There was and part of it was the party working together, but there was a scene, a battle. This is like way long time ago. One of the first things I ever experienced in gaming, but we were just on catwalks. I mean, that was the thing. It was like we were in catwalks, but it was basically like utter darkness all around us and like kind of an abyss below us kind of thing. And these creatures were coming out of they were coming towards us and that. And it's like none of those individual things were very like, wow, that was like just crazy out of this world, like different, kind of thing. But that battle where it took place made it more interesting. So I do think like where you engage with creatures sometimes, I don't know if that was the best example, but like where you engage with them can be the thing that like triggers your memory for that too, even if it wasn't like I don't remember those creatures like having a personality or really what they did in combat, but like I remember fighting them because of the place that it was, kind of thing. So
Wasn't it one of those early WoW games before I came along that you guys fought a skeleton and somebody like took off part of its thumb and then you saw it again and it was the skeleton without the thumb?
that was, I think the original one was prior to me playing, but then it reappeared in the game where I was the guy who got called away by the wizard when I had to go to work like every session.
But it was that
It was in that
same
session, yeah.
that same skeleton though.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So
So it was like a
that's
recurring
again
thing.
this idea of something that gets a bit of a personality, gets something unique. It was missing its
Yeah,
thumb and it was recurring.
yeah,
And I don't think that became a part of your story, but it definitely became a more memorable skeleton than
yeah.
the numerous skeletons that
Yeah,
you
right.
just killed.
We just annihilated,
So,
yeah. Yeah, I
yeah.
think, I can't remember where it was said. I think maybe you just said that, Matthew, but, like, what I would add on to is, like, when when players actually grab onto something, go with it, like, that can be really easy, like, "Oh, I really cared about this person," like, being the one, and it's like, they don't care about that person, they care about this guy. You've talked about Rolo, it's like random dude who was the gatekeeper for the mayor,
Absolutely
but
nothing in my story, but you
yeah.
guys latched
Yeah.
on to him.
Like, he became a thing, and that was, like, that was a really good use of that because it's like, it was a constant interest for us, but also, like, changed the story, kind of thing, and, even to the point of he was in the prologue, of the thing,
Yep.
so, that I think that's cool, like, if, maybe I think it's cool to be intentional, but sometimes it's more about, like, okay, they were super interested in this creature, so maybe bring it back around kinda deal, but yeah. Um, so Eric goes on to say, following the follow up, how can GMs easily and quickly differentiate monsters of the same type at the table to track things like conditions, HP, etc.? So this is like more practical speaking. there's a battle going on. I've got 17 goblins. How do I keep track of like that one's lost 7 HP? That one's not been hit at all. This one's sickened. Like I think that's the question is what I'm reading that as.
So at the table, the easiest way to do this is you write right beside the little character.
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of knows he's lost 7. That kind of gives some stuff away. Plus, if they move a lot that gets really tough. That can be hard. A lot of times I would pick minis that just had a little bit different look. And I would like on my, behind my counter, I'd write the one with the red headband, the one with the blue headband, the one with the, because I think we had like 4 or 5 that looked the same but had different color headbands or, something like that. The one with the spear, the one with the, whatever, the one with the sack over his shoulder, because we would use the same, minis for everything. And so I would do it like that. There has to be some sort of little code. Otherwise it can get really confusing. Now online, you can assign a bunch of them and keep track of them a little easier, but how about you?
Yeah. I definitely, I use the like just writing on the table thing when I don't care too much about the meta part of it. I'm kind of visual and I'm also disorganized. So a lot of times I just have like a scratch pad anytime I'm running a game, and most often I am keeping track of them there, but I don't just have like a list. I like draw out the map. I'm doing air quotes for you listening. It's more like kind of positionally where these people are when I start writing in, like, okay, this one's at 13 HP, but these are at 20. The initial kind of position is on my piece of paper, and that helps me. I'm not saying that that's going to help everybody. It may just get more confusing when you start moving, but once I've had that set, I have a pretty good idea of where they are for my
thing we used to do when we started. We would use pipe cleaners of different colors to denote conditions. So
and I actually am bringing that back. I'm bringing that back too. I have
bringing it back.
Bringing it back.
So it used to be there was this condition bloodied when you got below half health or whatever. But there's also things like slowed or exhausted or whatever. And we would have different color pipe cleaners. We just throw it on top of the character, a little circle right on their head. And this guy have like 4 or 5 little stacks of pipe cleaners. Now they have all kinds of like mass produced, products that say things like, sleep or exhausted or whatever. And you can put these little rings around your characters or whatever, but you don't need those pipe cleaners, man.
The condition rings, pipe cleaners. There are like little sticky notes. I mean, that you could do that too if you don't want to leave it on the map, but you want to be able to move them around. You can do that writing. So that's just some ideas, that'd be a thing. Let's hear it in the chat if you guys have better ideas, kind of thing. But that's kind of the way I've used it before.
Yeah. All right, let's hit our last question to wrap things up here today.
Finally, a philosophical conundrum. What makes a creature definitely a quote monster? Could PCs ever fall within that definition? Keep up the great work on the podcast. Sincerely, Eric.
Yeah, so we've touched on this already. I think it's those things that are someone who is totally self-centered and enacts injustice in several ways. Those become monsters no matter what. If you want to, and this, I've talked about this before, I love playing gray characters instead of, typically there are some that I'm like, these are going to be bad. And that's when I throw, the full, they've done injustice. They're bad. They only care about themselves and they sneer a lot. That's obviously somebody you just are going to kill. But I like to play with these gray areas where it's a character that our PCs initially hate, but then he just does something good enough, seems to have a restorative, redeeming quality about him. And so they begin to like him. And then just when he gets like on their good side, he does something like backstabbing and then they start to hate him again. But then it's because of this thing, and they just don't know what to think of this guy. Do we hate him or do we love him? I love those kinds of characters, and that's what makes it hard for them to decide, is he a monster? You can easily kind of move people back and forth just based on these little glimmers of redemption or injustice.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
Could PCs ever fall into that definition? Oh yeah, we get some PCs who they just kill everything and it doesn't matter. And then, at some point, you can even bring in like another adventuring party who confronts him and says, yeah, this Lord's got a bounty on your guys' head because you're just hobo killers. That's not what's the word?
Murder hobos.
Murder.
It's a very different thing. Also bad.
Very different, but also makes you a monster if you're going around killing hobos. You're these murder hobos just going around killing everything you come across, and somebody might confront you about it. I think you can fall into that. Hopefully people want to be at least in their minds on the good side, but sometimes that's a very thin line.
Yeah. My wife helps with musicals in our town, and they're doing Hunchback of Notre Dame this year in the spring. And the quote is, "What makes a monster and what makes a man?" That's like asked throughout that. So, and the whole thing is like the Hunchback is like monstrous looking, but it's not him that's the monster kind of thing. As we find, spoiler for a story that's been around.
Just spoiling everything. Way to go, Adam.
sorry about that. But I think there's even I think some play with that, and I'm sure tons of literature. But I reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I think you get even some of that too, of who is actually the monster kind of there. And I think PCs definitely could be even not playing a monstrous, using air quotes again, race, you could be a monster. I don't find a lot of entertainment or joy in that as a player personally, but that's, I think, something that could go that way. Red Markets, I think, plays a little bit with that idea. Very different kind of thing. You're not really a hero. You're not doing heroing in Red Markets. You're doing what you have to. Is kind of the idea. It's you're going to do what you have to survive, or you're probably not going to survive, kind of thing. And so I think that plays a little bit with what kind of person are you, and so that, I think, I can come out for the player, not the players, but the characters that are being played. But yeah, I just echoing, you, Matthew, there can be glimmers of compassion or care or sympathy. Yeah, those kind of things, I think, could be in a creature that you expect to be not. I think even cinema, were maybe drawn to if this monster shows sadness, the crowd feels sadness for that creature, and realizes, oh, there's air quotes once again, humanity, in them, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's a really cool thing to play with, complexity wise, with your monsters, or creatures, or whatever it is, to do that with.
Yeah. I just noticed this episode how much Adam uses air quotes, as he's had to say it for our
3 times
audio
at least.
only. 3 times at least. All right. Well, hey guys, we're so glad you could join us this week as we talked about monsters. And if you've had any other thoughts, feel free to drop those in any of our socials, letting us know how you deal with keeping monsters fresh. Adam, what are we talking about next time here?
Next time, we're talking about world building, specifically making of the kind of overworld of your campaign, and how do you make a map?
Considerations for making a world and a map. Join us then. It's going to be a good time. And we'll, after that, take a break for Christmas, but we'll definitely be here next week on Rise of the GM.
Thanks, everyone.